Good evening, fellow blade enthusiasts, and thank you for tuning into another episode of Studio GDT Reviews. Tonight we're going to be taking a look at our first Romance of Men custom katana. This is a T10 Choji Hamon aesthetic polish custom ordered katana through their website. And the question that we're going to try and answer here tonight is, custom and more money always better than pre-made, off-the-shelf, and designed up front? So hopefully by the end of this, we'll be able to answer that question. When first talking with Romance of Men, they were very helpful and wanted to participate in these reviews and suggested that I review their Surodoi katana. I had seen that sword reviewed in multiple places, and it was reviewed very thoroughly and seemed to be a very positive sword. So in my mind, at that point in time, it didn't make much sense to do that again. You know, there were already some real quality reviews out there for it, so it didn't make sense to show everybody the same thing that they've already seen. So I asked Romance of Men, I said, hey, I appreciate that. You know, maybe we could try something a little different, and they agreed to that. One thing I found with custom swords is, you know, the manufacturer in many cases is not going to question what you ask for unless they take a look at that build sheet and see something completely in conflict. Otherwise, the old adage, the customer is always right when it comes to matters of taste, takes precedence, and however you build it is how they're going to make it. On the consumer side of things, we don't necessarily know how things are going to look when we're building them and selecting them and putting them together. You know, we say, hey, we like this fitting, we like this Ito wrap, we like this Samegawa, we like this saya, we like this blade. Now put it all together and hope it works. But is that always better than something that a company takes time to put together and perfect? So let's take a look at what I built on custom and compare it to what we've seen through some other reviews in the past and find out what came out on top.
As a reminder, I am an amateur martial artist and an amateur sword reviewer. The opinions expressed herein are mine alone, and please take them with a grain of salt. The sword that was sent that we're looking at today was sent as a review sample, although it would not change my opinion whether it was or was not. Lastly, make sure to exercise caution at all times when handling sharp objects and do not run with scissors. The custom katana builder is relatively easy to use. Your sword starts out at $160 and moves up from there. I went obviously with sharp and decided to go with T10 steel, and you've got quite a few different Hamon options. There's some Horimono in there, some pretty crazy looking designs. In the end, I ended up selecting the Choji Hamon with aesthetic polish. When you take a look at their saya options, they've got all kinds of crazy things going on in there. So if you're not into like a traditional or bland type setup and you're looking for a little bit more color or some elaborate designs, Romance of Men is definitely the way to go because they've got something for everybody as far as the saya options are concerned. There's an equal amount of fittings options. There's a wide variety of habaki as well, including some interesting designs, one that we'll talk about on my sword when we get through. And then you've got Hishigami as an option, which I selected, and full wrap, which I also selected. When you scroll down, one thing that I appreciated is they give full descriptions of everything. So if you're not entirely certain what the sword's going to look like, there is a standard length to it, but if you need more info on steel types or better, larger photographs, they're all included below. As far as you scroll, you can see in the scroll wheel. There's lots of scrolling to deal, so I won't show you everything, but it's there. I originally configured this sword during the run of Shogun on television, so I went with a Tokugawa theme that I think came out looking pretty good. The black lacquer was nice, and the gold Tokugawa crest, I think, contrasted well with it. I think in the end, I wish I would have went with white Samegawa instead of black, but that's the way that it is. The Tsuka being a full wrap loses a little bit of its Haichi shape. You can barely make it out in this image. It was there, but lost a little bit of it with the full wrap. The Kashira and Fuchi are a floral motif made out of probably a zinc or magnesium. Not my favorite material, but that's just what it is. They do the job and they look fine. The Manuki painted a gloss black against the black Samegawa. I can't quite make out what it is. I think it's a dragon, but I'm not entirely certain. It kind of gets lost, which is why I wish I went with the contrasting white Samegawa instead. Here you can see the Itsuka profile. Sometimes when you do a full wrap, they get rather bulbous and round. This isn't necessarily that way, but there are some issues, as you can see pointed out here. I don't know if this is paper underneath it that is part of the Hishigami, but you can see that there's some surface errors. That being said, the Hishigami is quite tight. This is fairly thin Ito, but I mean, it's on there like a rock, and it definitely feels extremely aggressive in the hand. I think if you wanted to create a heavy cutter, the full wrap plus Hishigami from Romance of Men is a pretty solid way to go. The alloyed Tsuba features what I believe is a Shisa dog and a Nanakoji-esque type pattern, which if you've watched this channel long enough, you know that that's kind of my jam. It's not quite the right size, but at least it's not missing some of it because of an overused cast. So I'll give them props for that and appreciate the fact that it's complete. And I just wish it was all black, and I wish it was iron instead of whatever alloy it ended up being. The sword to Saya fit and alignment was quite nice, and it matches up nicely with the Seppa. The Koiguchi area was quite interesting to me. There is not, to my knowledge, any buffalo horn used or whatnot, but the way that it was cut and the shape and the material was very different from everything I've acquired before. That isn't to say that it doesn't work well, because it actually does work quite well, but it was an interesting look when I saw it. So it is definitely not traditional, but it does the job and does it well. I did get 2 different Shitodome, which I know these are kind of throwaway on Langshuan swords, but I think if I was a first-time customer and that happened, it might irk me a little bit. I'm sure they would have replaced it if I would have asked. The Tokugawa Mon were relatively well detailed. The kind of muddiness you see on the top portion of it was duplicated on each stamp of it, so I'm leaning to believe that that's an issue with the stencil and not the application of it, so might need to clean up the stencil a bit. The Sageo is the area where I was probably the least pleased. It was the thinnest that I had seen so far. It had quite a lot of frays in it. It's very thin and bouncy. It wouldn't hold shape. I don't think I would use it in an actual class type setting, and I would probably replace it. I think if you were at the original $160 price point, it wouldn't be much of an issue, but after you choose selections and options, I think maybe getting a different Sageo would be a good move. Now on to the slicey section of the sword. The blade is a T10 Shinogi Zukuri style blade featuring a Choji style Hamon with aesthetic polish. The blade is quite beefy. It does not feature any sort of bohi. It has a small amount of Niku, but not much. It's relatively Niku-less, but there's a bit on there. The sword definitely has some heft. Starting at the base of the sword is the Tokugawa featured Habaki. I really like this because it's an indented logo. I've seen plenty of laser engraved stuff with it, which is obviously not very authentic to me, but I like the fact that the Habaki has this indented logo on it. It does have a relatively good fit to the sword, as you can see here. It lines up nice. It's not custom printed to it, but it does a pretty good job of adhering to its shape. The blade flats are flat with nary a ripple in sight, so good job there in making sure it's nice and flat. Now we'll take a look at the crazy Choji Hamon that's present on this. It isn't a true Choji Hamon in featuring the clove-like shape. This is more of a fire-type Choji Hamon, which has its own aesthetic value, I think. The main issue for this sword, for me, in regards to the Hamon and the polish, is that it's a reverse polish. So, one, it's extremely difficult for me to photograph, even in varying lighting conditions. It's almost impossible for me to get to show you all the activity and the character in it. but the reverse polish just is also, it's not my cup of tea. You have the mirrored Hamon, and then the cloudy G area, and then of course the mirror Shinogi G to Shinogi. So definitely it's interesting. The Kisaki area was the part of the sword that unfortunately had the least desirable result. It did not feature a Yokote at all. This was not a Shobuzukuri style sword, and unfortunately on both sides there was some surface rust. After speaking with Romance of Men, they believe, even though the wood for the saya had been drying for over a year, that it was probably a result of moisture in the saya. They did offer me multiple options to be able to resolve it. With this being a review sample, I didn't take any of them because it just didn't make sense. But know that from a customer perspective, if anything like this does happen, that they will take care of you. All flaws aside, I would still use this for heavy cutting practice. It's an extremely beefy, wide blade, and I think it would withstand a lot of punishment. The Tsuka is beefy, the wrap is beefy. It definitely has its own merit. Do I think maybe I could have saved some money by not going with the Choji Hamon and still accomplish the same result? Probably.
So there you have it. I thought this was a pretty interesting exercise in that custom doesn't necessarily always mean better. It can mean more expensive as you're picking piece by piece by piece and kind of nickel and diming it. Think of it like going to a restaurant and not buying something that's pre-made for you with all your various sides, and instead saying, okay, I'm gonna pick everything a la carte. I'm gonna do this a la carte, this a la carte. While you're at it, give me some of this, give me some of that, and at the end of the day, you get your bill, and it's more expensive than if you would have went with something that was pre-made for you. Another thing that I found is that every manufacturer that I've dealt with so far, each one always seems to do at least one thing very, very well. It's kind of like their calling card or their niche. I did feel this was Romance of Men in this particular sword that I had one of the tightest Edo wraps that I have ever felt. I mean, it just really felt like it was going nowhere, and if I wanted to brutally abuse this sword, if I wanted to cut hard targets, if I just wanted to bash this like a monster, I would feel pretty confident that at least the wrapping of it is going to stay in place. But looking back, the Surodoi might have been a great way to go. It presents an excellent value for the price point. It's something that they created, they matched, they know it works, and a custom order at some point can kind of be a crapshoot. It wasn't that there was anything wrong with it, it's just that maybe all the things that I selected and picked together didn't necessarily gel, and the price point didn't reflect that. So, interesting exercise, and I wanted to thank Romance of Men for allowing us to do it. I would definitely go back and try one of those Surodoi out if it ever came my way again, and it was a lesson learned. So I hope you enjoyed the review, and please make sure to like and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Have a great evening.